We will now hear the presentation of the Independent Telecommunications Providers Association. Please introduce yourself. You have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission panel. My name is Jonathan Holmes. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Telecommunications Providers Association, and I'm here on the behalf of the 21 member companies of our association, all of which are rural incumbent telecom carriers. As small rural carriers, ITPA members hold the potential to help you meet your objectives in rural markets across Canada. To my right is Rob Patrouk, ITPA board member and Chief Executive and Technology Officer of Gosfield Communications, which currently does not provide wireless mobile services. Gosfield wants to enter the MVNO market if a regulatory framework is established by the Commission that facilitates market participation for small regional carriers. Companies like Gosfield are the reason we have proposed our Basket 2 services, as without them, Gosfield would not be able to enter the MVNO market. Our member companies are in a tough spot when it comes to entering the wireless market in their regions. In this proceeding, we have referred to our conundrum as being caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, the ISED spectrum auction process is effectively closed to us due to the expense of the wireless spectrum, an ISED system of geographic license areas. On the other hand, despite our demonstrated interest in wireless and our prior efforts to get into the business, our requests to the large MNOs for MVNO access have not borne fruit. But the wireless market is huge and growing and profitable, and our member companies are eager to get into that space, better serve our customers, and compete with the big three MNOs. How is it that we achieve our goals of wireless market entry and break free from the rock and the hard place in which we are currently stuck? For companies such as Rob's, this MVNO proceeding represents the best opportunity we have ever had to achieve our goals, while helping you meet the wireless competition and rural service objectives set out for the Commission by the federal government.
The digital divide between urban and rural Canada is one of the foremost policy priorities of the federal government and of this Commission. There is already a wireless divide between urban and rural markets in Canada in terms of product offerings and competitive alternatives. We encourage you to implement an MVNO regulatory framework that puts an end to the wireless divide that already exists, rather than entrenching it for another 5 years. The 2019 policy direction to the Commission leaves little ambiguity in your role in relation to the opening of the MVNO market in Canada. Moreover, by virtue of the direction, the important terms and conditions which you establish in this proceeding cannot be selected in a vacuum, far from it. Rather, the Commission must consider how your MVNO framework will reflect and promote a number of key policies, two of which, in particular, we would like to highlight. First, the extent to which your decisions ensure that affordable access to high-quality telecom service is available in rural areas. And second, the extent to which your decision reduces barriers to entry for providers that are regional and that are smaller than the incumbent national service providers. Both of these policies require positive and carefully considered action on your part.
A great deal of hope has been invested in the regional MNOs such as Shaw, Eastlink, and Videotron, and in their potential to increase competition in Canada to provide lower prices. The same degree of speculative hope applies to Cogeco, to its proposal for an MVNO framework. We are confident that these regional MNOs can and likely will do their part to enhance wireless market competition in Canada, but we also think it would be a serious mistake to assume that these companies will contribute in any meaningful way to enhance wireless competition in rural areas for the benefit of rural Canadians. Nor do we think that Cogeco's proposal in this proceeding is likely to bridge the wireless divide between urban and rural Canadians. Allow me to explain. In a way, it's like looking into both ends of a telescope. Depending on which end you are looking through, you would get two different perspectives on what you're looking at. In the MVNO context, perspective is important. For example, from the Commission's perspective, you may see the existing regional MNOs as the parties best placed to expand wireless service competition to areas beyond the urban city limits. From the ITPA's perspective, however, we don't view the wireless market from the urban core outward. Instead, we see this marketplace from the rural heartland inward. From the perspective of where our member companies operate, we typically don't see much from these regional MNO companies in the way of competitive service offerings or marketing efforts. Instead, we see these regional MNOs focusing on the more densely populated urban and suburban markets rather than the rural areas where we operate.
Pardon me. In our experience, cable companies like Cogeco haven't really expanded their networks outside of these more densely populated urban and suburban areas into rural areas. And that reality is actually central to Cogeco's proposed MVNO framework in this proceeding, which seems to stop well short of rural Canada. In the ITPA's opinion, the objective of ensuring affordable, high-quality wireless service in rural areas isn't achieved via the existing regional MNOs. Accordingly, how can the Commission ensure that rural Canadians receive affordable, competitive wireless service? The answer: by facilitating our member companies' ability to enter the MVNO market and to compete in the wireless sector in rural Canada. ITPA member companies are already well established in rural areas. In most cases, our longevity is rivaled only by Bell Canada. Our member companies are, to borrow the Competition Bureau's term, true disruptors in rural markets. We were the first to offer broadband internet access in those markets and have also made, comparatively speaking, huge investments in fiber to the home. It is truly amazing where you can access our member companies' fiber to the home networks in rural Canada. Serving rural markets is where our past, present, and future interests lie. We urge you not to choke off the potential for greater wireless competition in rural Canada through rules you set in this proceeding.
The ITPA and its member companies are pleased that there are 4 or so different regulatory frameworks and approaches on the table in this proceeding, because in our opinion, choosing the correct MVNO framework is the most critical decision the Commission must make. Our 21 member companies are anxiously awaiting the outcome of this proceeding to assess the regulatory framework for MVNO that you set. In our opinion, what is needed is a carefully considered MVNO entry framework. The terms and conditions must encourage companies like ours with a solid track record of network experience, expertise, and demonstrated success to enter that market. We have very carefully examined the various proposals placed before the Commission, our own and that of Cogeco, CNOC, and the Commissioner of Competition. While we agree with the Competition Bureau's view that a facilities-based approach is the most beneficial, for the reasons we've already discussed, our member companies would be excluded because spectrum auctions are inaccessible to our members. CNOC and the others are proposing only a full MVNO entry model with no upfront eligibility criteria. Their proposal opens the door to wireless-only entrants, a gamble which we consider to be a reckless one. Wireless-only entrants do not have a good track record in this country. We also have several issues with Cogeco's proposal. Significantly, Cogeco's limits on the areas in which an MVNO could sell its services are too restrictive and are tantamount to market entry barriers that needlessly constrain the potential for expanded competition.
It may not surprise you that we prefer our own proposal. For instance, we are the only party to have proposed a Basket 2 set of services that should be mandated from the MNOs. To be clear, Basket 2 is a list of mandated enabling services that would be available under tariff above and beyond the RAN of the MNOs. We'd like to tell you why we're proposing Basket 2 services. Wireless core networks are different from voice or internet networks. They require different switches, other equipment, and capabilities specific to the wireless business. While an existing wireline service provider would be able to leverage many aspects of its existing business, it would need an entirely new set of equipment related to wireless. Not surprisingly, our own internal discussions suggest that fully 19 of our 21 member companies will require Basket 2 services in order to enter the MVNO market.
From the perspective of our member companies, which are all far smaller than companies such as Eastlink, TechSavvy, and Distributel, making the upfront investments needed to create its own wireless core simply isn't affordable. The economics don't work. There are a couple of instances on the record of this proceeding where parties have estimated it would cost over $1 million for wireless core network components. There must be regulatory action by you, decisive regulatory action, to establish a Basket 2 set of mandated services that rural carriers, such as ITPA members, can leverage to enter the market and get started. In conclusion, we have welcomed the opportunity this proceeding has given us to develop our proposal and to present it to you in our written filings, and in these oral remarks, we will do our best to respond to any questions you have for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation and for making your way through the snowy conditions to be here with us. Commissioner Leisner.
Good morning. Thank you for your intervention and your presentation. I'd like to start by talking to you a little bit about issues in the retail market. At paragraph 7 of your May 15th, 2019 intervention, you submitted that if the Commission's mobile wireless service regulatory framework is going to remain unchanged, that you don't expect any change in the level of competition in the future. On the other hand, parties have appeared before us and argued that the introduction of unlimited plans by the national MNOs in June of 2019 and the associated competitive response by regional carriers represent a significant development in terms of competition in the mobile wireless market. So I just would like to get your perspective on that.
I'll start that off. I don't think there's any doubt that the introduction of the unlimited plans, quote-unquote unlimited plans, have made a splash in the market and have been a significant shift. Coming at it from a rural perspective, though, and where our companies operate, I would say that unless companies like ours can get regulatory relief and have the opportunity to enter the market, the situation in rural Canada won't be as competitive as it otherwise could be.
We understand that some of your members have network sharing arrangements with Bell. Are you aware of any concerns that your members have expressed with respect to the existing arrangements?
I'm not aware of any network sharing arrangements. I know 2 of our member companies operate as MNOs, but I think they acquire their services from Bell Canada pursuant to the tariff. So I'm not really sure that that can be described as a network sharing, but I don't have any more detail than that.
Do you know if there are other small ILECs that have tried to negotiate an MVNO access or other arrangement to provide mobile wireless services with one of the large national carriers and were not successful or were successful?
Pardon me, I'm also getting over a little bit of a throat cold. I have been trying since 2012 to make some form of agreement to be able to provide cellular service. In fact, we own a small portion of 800 megahertz spectrum that is currently subordinated to one of the large carriers who sub-subordinates it to another carrier in our area, and I have had absolutely no luck even being able to approach the campsite, let alone get warmed by the fire. So the quick answer is no.
They didn't engage in any negotiations. Can you tell us who that was?
The 3 large carriers. Okay. So I've spoken with Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, and I've even reached out to Freedom/Wind, whatever the current name is now.
And did they provide any reasons for not engaging in a discussion on this?
In all honesty, the most recent reason that I got from Shaw, which is another one was that they were waiting for the results of this hearing. Previously, the answers were, it doesn't fit a business case that makes sense for them.
Okay. Anything else to add?
Yeah, we've talked to a number of our member companies, and there's probably 2 or 3 others that we've got indication back that they've approached Bell Canada and haven't had any luck with negotiating with them for a MVNO.
If your members, if your members were to become MVNOs in Canada, What measures do you believe they would take to ensure that wireless plans would be readily available to more vulnerable populations who wish to subscribe to them? I'm thinking of seniors and low-income households.
We have, I think, two of our member companies have responded to RFIs about affordability issues with the Commission. I think our position as small service providers is that if we can get into this market, one of the things we're going to compete on is price. That's one of them. So that will address to a certain extent affordability issues. We'll have to be able to get into the market and get market share somehow, and competing on price will help with affordability in our operating territories.
So if I could direct you to Exhibit 3, the CRTC Exhibit 3, which provides a summary of low-cost plans that were proposed by various consumer groups. I'll just give you a minute to flip to that.
Yeah, I have that.
Okay. So as we can see, they've proposed different low-cost plan options, which would come in at prices in the $20 to $30 range. When we look at different wireless service provider websites, there seems to be in the market as we speak plans offered with similar characteristics, but at prices closer to the $35 mark. So how feasible would it be for your members to offer a plan or a similar plan at a price point between $20 and $30, which is the proposal of these consumer groups?
The quick answer is I would have to review how much it's going to cost to provide the service in the first place. We have no set amounts or tariffed rates for how much it would cost for me to interconnect to the RAN, nor how much it would cost for me to turn up the equipment necessary for the Basket 2 services that we've proposed to be able to provide the service. I could say, though, in all reality, based on the pricing that we charge for our wireline, voice, IPTV, and internet services, I would imagine that we would be able to get them in a range that is affordable and reasonable, but I could not guarantee you at this time that it would be between a $20 to $30 range. I mean, if there was a way for me to bring T-Mobile over from Michigan, maybe, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about win-backs. Win-back activities, which are commonly defined as offering discounts to customers, free services, other inducements in order to convince them not to move or change service providers. What is the position of your members on whether win-back tactics are appropriate and fair for consumers?
We haven't really discussed it internally. I think how I would answer that question is looking back into my career history. I worked at Unitel in the early days of long-distance competition, and protection against the incumbent telephone companies' win-back activities was a good thing. It allowed us to hold on to customers a little bit longer, let them get comfortable with our services, that kind of thing. So I would say that they could be a good thing. Win-back restrictions could be a good thing for new competitive entrants coming in as they deal with the larger companies. But I would say, I think this isn't a surprise. They should be asymmetrical in terms of the large companies not being able to call immediately and try to win a customer back.
When you mean asymmetrical, that what you're saying is that your members should be able to engage in some win-back activities, but the large MNOs should not?
That's right.
And we heard from Shaw a proposal to have a 90-day embargo on win-back activities when a customer moves over to another service provider. Do you have any thoughts on that proposal?
Not on their exact proposal, but 90 days seems like a reasonable time period.
And have you heard from any of your members with respect to bad experiences they've had with customers porting and being contacted almost immediately to stay with a larger provider?
In our CLEC operations, we have that happen quite regularly. pretty much the minute that we apply to port the number from the incumbent or the company that is currently providing service, the win-back calls start immediately at that point in time. Oftentimes, the information provided to the customer challenges how we actually provide service, and then we're further explaining to the customer that no, our services do work when the lights go out.
So in your experience, that would happen right at the point of porting?
Yep, immediately. And then usually what will happen is these customers will call us back and say, we have an offer for X a month from company Y, but it's only for 6 months. Can you meet or match that price? And for us as a small provider, for the most part, our prices are set based on us being a co-op and being able to operate, function, and maintain our services and everything like that, as well as our infrastructure. So a lot of times we can't compete with a company that has the ability to cross-subsidize with other services that we don't yet have access to.
Are there any particular companies that you've experienced this with? Or would you say it's a problem across the board with
I would say it's a problem across the board.
And what percentage of the businesses experiences that? Is that something
I'd prefer
you could take it as
take
an
undertaking, yeah, and get back to you on
provide
it?
it in confidential information?
I'd prefer to do that, please.
If we can just talk a minute about the Competition Bureau model, I recognize that it's not the model that you feel would benefit your membership. Can you speak to how you feel that the Competition Bureau model falls short of the requirements of your members? And their model is that we would grant MVNO access to regional facilities-based carriers in areas where they have spectrum but have not yet built.
I think the main item on that question is just they have spectrum. We've talked right from the beginning in this proceeding that the ISED spectrum auction process, the auction process itself, the expense of the spectrum and the tier structure that ISED uses basically eliminates us from contention for wireless spectrum. So really, we don't really have to go much farther than that when we evaluate the Bureau's proposal. It just makes it inaccessible to us.
You have a couple of members with spectrum, though. You have some members with spectrum?
Yes, we do. They are, if I believe, statutory 800 licenses that they've had for a while, but they're specific to their incumbent telephony exchanges.
How many member companies would that affect?
I think it would be pretty much all of them would
Okay.
have the 800 statutory licenses.
Okay.
The other thing about the Bureau's proposal is I think they've only proposed that you would have RAN access for 5 years. That's the whole notion of phase out and a 5-year opportunity to get in and start making money. That's a short, I think a relatively short time from our members' perspective with regards to new lines of business.
Do you think it is unlikely that the Bureau's proposal would encourage any of your members to purchase spectrum and deploy or expand a network?
Yes, I think that's unlikely.
And that is because of the cost?
Yes, the cost and the process.
And what are your views if the Bureau's model was modified to allow a qualified carrier to have MVNO access not only in areas where they have spectrum and have not yet deployed, but also outside their serving territories? Would that negatively impact your members? So right now, the Bureau's model is that that the MVNO access would be for areas where they have spectrum but have not yet deployed. And so my question is geared for outside their serving territory, but limited to regional carriers.
So it would be outside their territory. They don't have spectrum.
Right.
But they would use the RAN to provide services outside their territory?
They would be able to negotiate as an MVNO.
Okay, we're on the negotiation question. We're not in favor of negotiations because we don't think new entrants, especially of our size, have any leverage really in those negotiations. I think we'll have.
Let's just hold on a minute. Continue, thank you.
We haven't really thought much about variations on the Bureau's proposal, so if we could undertake maybe to think about that and put some thoughts in writing to that question.
There is a reply period. So.
Okay.
And are there any of your members that currently have spectrum that is not used?
So we have a couple that are MNOs now that use their 800, that use their spectrum. We have another group of companies internally that have subordinated to Bell and have been able to negotiate a resale deal with Bell Canada to provide wireless services. And the rest have subordinated all of it to Bell Canada, and it's under contract. Subordination contract with Bell.
Okay, thank you. You've proposed that both wireline and wireless investments should qualify for the purposes of any investment-related eligibility criteria that might be adopted. Can you explain why it would be appropriate to consider wireline-related expenditures in eligibility criteria for an MVNO model?
Sure. So, again, it goes back to the fact that we don't have access to spectrum. Therefore, it doesn't make sense for us to make investments in whether it be towers, radios, all the associated hardware, that kind of thing. So from our member company's perspective, for something like that to work, I think you'd have to include our wireline investment as well.
Okay. And again, looking at the Bureau's proposed model, some parties have said that it's important to avoid a scenario where a carrier puts up one tower, suddenly gets nationwide MVNO access. Are there eligibility requirements in the nature of minimum spectrum holdings or network coverage above a certain size, by number of wireless subscribers? What would be your thoughts on that?
Just generally with regards to the Bureau's eligibility requirements?
Right.
I think we probably would just stop at the spectrum piece and say, for us, that's the end of the game with regards to the Bureau's proposal.
Yeah. Your membership appears to provide almost two models. One which is that would apply to smaller ILECs, and another that might apply to the larger potential MVNOs, such as regional carriers, CNOC members, Cogeco. So under your proposed model, MVNOs, as I understand it, would get access to the RAN, plus access to core network facilities, and I think you mentioned a period of at least 3 years, at which point the Commission would conduct a review to determine whether the core facilities should remain mandated. Is that an accurate assessment of the position?
Yep, I think so.
Okay. And the part of the proposal that I'm grappling with is the acknowledgement that core network facilities would not likely meet the essentiality test. We've heard many arguments that core network facilities can be duplicated readily. So help me out in understanding how they can be mandated if they can be duplicated.
If I look at TRP 2015-326, which I think is the last time the Commission revised its essential services test, there's a in paragraph 51, it says, in light of the above, the Commission will apply the following policy considerations to inform, support, or reverse a decision to mandate the provision of a wholesale service. So I think what the Commission has said in there, that it will mandate services that pass the essentiality test, but it's kept some leeway open to mandate essential services for other reasons. And one of them, which I think we have kind of hung our arguments for basket 2 being mandated is the innovation and investment criteria.
Okay.
It says mandating or not mandating the facility could affect the level of innovation, investment in advanced or emerging networks or services for incumbents or generally service providers. So if you look at that, that's really how we're justifying our request that you mandate what would otherwise not be essential services. And if you look at generally just what the definition of innovation is, I looked it up in a dictionary before I came here. I think it was a variant of the Oxford, and it said innovation can be defined as bringing in new methods, ideas, and products. So new methods, ideas, and products. And I think if ITPA members were going to get access to MVNO services, guys like Rob would turn back into their staff and say, okay, let's get to work and figure out what kind of services we can offer in competition to the well-established folks who are operating in our territory. And I think, according to that definition, anyways, you would see a lot of innovation on the ground in rural networks or in rural Canada. Would it be the latest, greatest thing since sliced bread? Maybe not, but you would definitely see new methods, new ideas, and new products come to the market.
I'd be interested in hearing more about the different types of innovation and differentiation that your members might bring to a market as MVNOs if we were to adopt the ITPA's model. Bearing in mind that you would not have your own core network, which many people would say is the part of the facilities that aids differentiation and competition the most.
So with access to cellular service, it does more than just provide us the ability to add a service to our basket. It actually gives us the ability to extend our services that we currently provide into more innovative ways of providing those services in general. As a great example, without cellular service, customers who subscribe to our IPTV service are not able to take their shows with them when they travel on vacation, because by the way the rules are set up for copyright on broadcast, you can't have someone outside of your network accessing content. So by access to an MVNO right there, automatically now I can offer like for like with the large 3 players, which helps round out, that's just IPTV. To take it even a step further, we have about 155 greenhouse growers and operators within a 35-kilometer radius of our operating territory. All of them are in rural sections of Essex County. In more recent times, access to affordable services or packages that make sense for them and for their workers are not something that currently exist. In light of that fact, I have begun a process for a nomadic voice over IP service to enable the 5,000 seasonal workers access to telephone, just simple telephone service in our area. The problem that we run into with that is that they end up going to wherever there's free public Wi-Fi and basically loitering in the towns that these seasonal workers are in, are getting frustrated because they're inundating existing businesses. So by being able to offer cellular service or MVNO access in general, right, there's a service already that I can provide, that I could find a way to meet the needs of these 5,000 employees that are helping grow Canada's economy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, not to mention when you get into Internet of Things and telematics, there's combines that drive themselves. And these are providers, these are greenhouse growers and operators with 700 acres of greenhouses that are coming to us because we're their provider for data that want us to help round out their services, but we're essentially cut short because I cannot round out their services, so I can't provide a layer 3 application that floats from my network to the cellular network to their services that they need to operate their businesses. And sorry if I'm getting a little too blinky light, but I've put a lot of thought into this.
No, and these are some of the things we're quite interested in hearing about. So thank you for those examples. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Off the top of my head, no. A lot of it is we just have, like, just our customer base comes to us on a regular basis and says, when are you going to do cell phone service? And my answer from our board of directors and from myself, as Gosfield as the co-op, has just been, we're working on it the best we can.
Okay, thank you. I understand your position that negotiated rates is not the way to go, and that you propose we hold a follow-up proceeding to determine final rates for core network access. And I gather your suggestion is that we use a proxy rate instead of a rate based on phase 2 costing. Do you have any thoughts on how the commission ought to go about determining a proxy rate?
I've got a couple. The first way would be to take a look through the large ILEX existing unbundled network components, tariff, things like switching and aggregation, direct connect, and other kind of unbundled tariff offerings, and see whether you could come up with something that's relatively close. And I need to acknowledge that I'm saying you're not going to find an exact match for these types of services. So the ILEX existing tariff services. The other possible way is, we heard, I forget who it was last week, Friday afternoon, Mike Kadar, I think, basically said, TELUS is an MVNO in Bell Canada's territory, Bell is an MVNO in TELUS's operating territory. So those agreements that they have between themselves, we don't have access to them. I suspect you might be able to get access to them and just see what rates are being charged kind of between their MNO operations, and use those as a possible way of setting a proxy rate. Thank you.
You've indicated that investment targets could be part of the model, but you're not in favor of administrative monetary penalties for failure to miss a target. And I just want to clarify whether that position is with respect to your members, or you don't agree with it with respect to larger MVNOs as well.
I think it would be any investment requirement policies would have to be industry-wide. So we would say that setting a target for any new MVNO entrant in the market probably isn't a good way to go, because when you think it through to its logical conclusion and someone doesn't meet the target, well, first of all, what is the target? How is the target set? How do you ensure that it's fair to a large company and a small company? Is there one? Is there a bunch of investment targets? I don't know what the answer to that is. But assuming a small company doesn't meet their investment target, what's the potential penalty, for lack of a better term, for that? Is it a monetary penalty? Is it disconnection? Those are pretty large, significant things for a company to look at facing. So I think our position is we've tried to, in our proposal, address the Commission's concern about continued investment in the Canadian telecom network. That's why we propose what we have in our upfront eligibility criteria and the ongoing investment obligations. But I think when you boil it right down, we would say make it a requirement on a year-over-year basis that the new entrants show that they are investing in their wireline and or wireless networks. Every year have them demonstrate how they have done that. And then we're proposing that's just for a period of 5 years as well. But I think rather than the Commission adopting penalties for not meeting those goals, Commission should just take an encouragement view, saying this is what we expect of new entrants. Tell us year over year how you've invested. And I don't have a good answer other than that with regards to what you do if a company comes back a year, 1 year or 2 years and say, I can't demonstrate any incremental investment. It's a tough one to figure out.
Right. So based on what you've said just now, does that mean that you're modifying slightly the suggestions that you made in the intervention about perhaps considering prohibitions on local service requests? Are you drawing back from that and saying really it should be an encouragement-based model where the Commission has expectations and asks for frequent reporting to just keep on top of the situation?
Yeah, I think not adopting a penalty-based approach rather make it an encouragement-based approach. So yeah, the short answer to your question is yes. I think we are revising our position on that.
Okay. You suggested that investment should be tracked using an MVO's capital asset account. And should be set by the Commission as a percentage of revenues. That's an accurate assessment of your position?
Yes.
And do you have a view on what an appropriate percentage would be and why?
I'm going to have to undertake that. Until Saturday, we did have a third member of our panel, but there was a family emergency and she wasn't able to attend. So if I could undertake to take that away and get you an answer in writing, that would be great.
It's March 10th is our time frame for that. Under your model, would regional competitors like Shaw, Videotron, Eastlink be permitted to enter the serving territories of the small ILECs and compete as MNOs? MVNOs, sorry.
Yep, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, yes.
You've opposed a restriction on reselling of MVNO access to other MVNOs. Could you expand on why that's a concern for you?
I think that we actually revised that position.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We revised our position on resale. So I was just trying to figure out when exactly we did that, but our initial position was very restricted or no resale, but we've over the course of the proceeding, reading other parties, other potential competitors' interventions, we changed our mind, and it's our position that resale of MVNO should be permitted.
All right, and what are your thoughts on access to domestic and international roaming arrangements of the host carrier? Are you in favor or opposed to that?
For where we are geographically, it would be a necessity for us to be competitive. We're 35 minutes away from downtown Detroit, Michigan. The majority of my subscribers, the majority of our customers, the majority of our members of our co-op go shopping in Michigan. They follow the Detroit Tigers, the Red Wings. They don't understand Toronto. And it just doesn't, as a whole, it doesn't make sense to them. They know that Canada's this great, beautiful country, but when they think about home, they think about Detroit a lot of times. And that's not to say that it's not Canadian-based or anything, but I mean, myself personally, from September until November, I'm traveling to Ann Arbor, Michigan 3 times a month, basically, for college football. It's just something that I've done with my family forever. But that's indicative of how people in our area live. So if we don't have a cross-border roaming agreement, it automatically stifles our ability to be competitive. So we would need access. I think the important part of becoming an MVNO is that we would have to be able to provide the same services as the large MNOs. If we can't compete like for like, we can't even come to the table to compete. People generally don't want to sit at their home and use their cell phone necessarily. They're out and about and traveling and driving and going skiing in London or to Halton, or they're coming to our capital. And they don't want to be quarantined to only using their service in a given area and subject to horrible roaming rates as soon as they leave our operating territory or our service area. I think that's where it kind of bleeds into where we disagree with the Tier 4 COGICO presentation of limiting your area and scope of ability to provide the service.
Go ahead.
I think in order for the service to be competitive, like I said, we have to be able to provide identical service to large MNOs. if we're not doing that, we're not necessarily servicing our customers and our subscribers appropriately. I don't know if we would have a chance to really be the true disruptors that I think you want us to become, and the disruption that you want to see in our industry right now. And I love being a disruptor, so whenever I can.
All right, point taken. I meant to ask you when we were discussing rate setting, what your views were on the retail minus approach to rate setting that was suggested by some other parties that appeared before us.
We haven't really thought too much about that approach. I think our approach is probably better to go with a phase 2 based approach ultimately.
Okay. And if the Commission were to mandate wholesale MVNO access, which carriers do you think should be obligated to provide that access? So I'm talking about large MNOs, the regional carriers. What are your views on that?
I think our position is it should probably just be the big 3 MNOs.
And in those terms, do you have a view on whether there should be a requirement that it applies to the wireless carrier in each area with the largest network coverage or market share?
In terms of coverage area, our position is that if you would get access to Bell Canada's RAN, you should be able to sell services across their entire, at least across their entire footprint. If the Commission is not comfortable with that, we'd be fine limiting it to a province, kind of a province by province approach. And we think all 3 should be required to offer MVNO services to new entrants.
And what about SaskTel and TBaytel?
We don't have any member companies in SaskTel, so we really haven't thought about them all that much. TBaytel, same response.
Those are all my questions. Thank you very much. Joanne, do you have a question?
Thank you. I have one, maybe a quick follow-up to a question that Commissioner Leisner asked you. In the Bureau's model, they've suggested that MVNOs have to demonstrate, a certain managerial, operational, financial capacity. And if I heard correctly, in response to Vice Chair Leisner's question, that you said it would not make sense to require a potential MVNO to have a minimum number of wireless subs to fulfill that obligation. Did I get that correct?
Oh, that's me. I'm so sorry.
I don't think we talked about wireless subs with regards to being an eligibility.
Well, just the criteria to fulfill the proposed requirement identified by the Bureau. Are you familiar with can't talk this morning, to what I'm referring to?
Haven't spent a lot of time on the Bureau, again, because of the spectrum requirement.
So let me rephrase it then. So what the Bureau has said is that a potential MVNO should necessarily demonstrate a level of managerial, operational, financial capacity. And one of those might be, for example, a minimum number of wireless subscribers. What would be your views on that? And if that isn't a useful criterion given your members' relative small size, what other factors could the Commission consider when contemplating what would fulfill that managerial, operational, financial capacity?
Thank you. I understand. Thanks for the clarification. So we've, in our upfront eligibility criteria, we have actually proposed that the new entrant have a proven and stable track record as a wireline retail service provider in Canada, so we haven't proposed wireless. And what we said is the CRTC could require that the carrier provide a description of its current operations and provide any details required by the Commission. And we note that you have taken that approach for your new broadband fund with regards to who's an eligible carrier, and I think you've got some managerial or some kind of eligibility requirements along the lines of, we know how to run a business and we've been around for a while, those kind of things. So I think we'd prefer to go that approach rather than, you already have so many wireless subs, because some of our member companies don't have any wireless customers at all.
Okay, that's very helpful. Council, any other questions? Please go ahead.
Good morning. Just one clarification question. If your companies were to be granted MVNO access, would it be correct to state that you'd only be interested in selling to subscribers within those serving areas, even if the access was granted to a broader area than that through roaming and so on?
I would say our initial target market would be our existing subscribers, because we have their information. It's a base that we can market to rather readily. But, pardon me, as I stated a little bit earlier, when it comes to businesses and everything like that, oftentimes their headquarters might be located in Cottam, Ontario, but they have satellite office all over the place. So I would say that access to areas outside of our existing area of service would be necessary and welcomed.
If I could add to that as well, it's fairly expensive business, fairly complex business to get into. So from looking at it from even just a residential subscriber's perspective, we would want to get as many customers on board to our service as absolutely possible. Our incumbent operating territories like our exchanges aren't that geographically large, so yeah, we would want access ideally to the entire RAN. Whether we'd all of a sudden jump into the Toronto market from Rob's spot in down in Cottam, probably not, because you have to build brand awareness along the way, and that can be an expensive process. But yeah, we would look at definitely expanding outside of our operating territories right now.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's all from us, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. You said earlier that your subscribers don't understand Toronto. Someone born and brought up in Montreal, I agree. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your views with us and for your contribution to the proceeding.